Hello everyone and welcome back to Blooming Times. In this video we're going to try to do something a little bit different, as it is the conclusion video for the Argentinian series. And in it I would like to be a little bit more improvised and look back at some of the highlights and favorite moments that we've had throughout the series. And also provide you with some extra clips that we haven't used yet, because they didn't fit in other videos really, but I still think inform very well the way that we understand Argentina and its culture as a whole. And finally, I would like to reflect on the series, the lessons we've learned, the things we've missed maybe, and the potential extra discoveries that there is still to be done in the country. So let's get started in this first ever conclusion video for a Blooming Time series. So obviously it's very difficult to select just a few moments from this incredible adventure that we had in Argentina and all of the people that we've met there. But the first one has to be the discovery of the Peña world and the Peña community in Buenos Aires. It was such a surprise to meet with Lola Funes, to discover the work that she has done for this community and for the dances there.
We went to two different peñas. One was out in the park, and that reminded me of French folk festivals, and the vibe was exactly the same. People were super kind and willing to show me steps and inviting me to dance. That was really, really nice.
When we sat down for the interview with Lola, it was, of course, incredible to hear from her how she builds communities around the practice of dance and how she uses the Peña culture as a catalyst for people to get together. And then we experienced this by ourselves when we went to different peñas in Buenos Aires with different energies and different vibes all together. But always we saw so many people dancing with such different qualities and diversity in movement and energy. But it was always very vibrant. And it was great to discover the Peña culture in Buenos Aires. Of course, another big highlight for us was the discovery of the region of Mendoza, which was extremely rich. And it was rich in two different aspects that blended together really well. On one side, it was rich on the human side when we met Roger Caeres and all of the musicians from his ensemble. And they took us into their group, into their extended family, and they allowed us to experience how they experience culture, how they make it live every day and every week. And on the other side, Mendoza has incredible nature all around, the whole region around it. It's really impressive and it's very striking because there is a very strong contrast between dry landscapes coming from the Pampa in the middle of Argentina, and then the powerful life force from the mountains, from the Andes, that is bringing a lot of water in the valley and allows for all of the vineyards to exist. All of the water from Mendoza comes directly from the mountain, and it's really well organized the way the water flows down, and you can feel the life force from the mountain, the fact that the mountain provides. And those two things together gave us the feeling that the region of Mendoza is just really full of life and full of heart. And finally, one of the biggest highlights has to be the exploration of the northern region of Argentina, with the city of Salta and all the areas around it at the south and at the north of it, Jujuy, and particularly the Quebrada de Humahuaca. Those regions are extremely unique in Argentina and honestly I think in the world, because of the historical reality of those regions and the geographical organization. It makes them very secluded, and historically they are extremely rich in terms of the mixing of different cultures and the blending of different people also. And what that makes in the reality today is that the people that we have met, like Horacio Quispe and the musicians from Andinos, it was always this feeling that we got that they had a very powerful identity connected to their history and to their land. That was something very unique and very powerful for us to discover, is the quality of identity and character from the people today in this northern region of Argentina. Now that we have looked back at the Argentinian series so far, it's time to share some little extra things that we have kept into our trick hat until now, because it didn't really fit into any other videos. It was not completely focused on folk or peñas, but we feel it was still relevant to understanding the Argentinian culture. One of the first extra insight that we can get into is something that we like to call the New World Advantage. And it is explained here in a few different clips about things like the wine production process, the energy sustainability efforts, and the integration and development of new technologies into the social fabric of the country.
Okay, Rafa.
Yes.
Why do you? Can you tell us again a little bit about the reason why here the wines are like flexible in terms of like what they can try, about the label and compared to Europe? Because we were discussing the fact that in Europe everything is labeled and has to reproduce in a certain way to fit the label. And
I think the main difference, it's like I told you, we don't have appellations, denomination, and everything. In the first years of the making here in Argentina, they tried to establish the denomination of origin of Luján de Cuyo. And it only 5 wineries applies for that. Just to show to the world that Luján de Cuyo is very important, okay? What does it mean to have an appellation? It's like you have to produce the same wine every single year in the same way, okay? So if you want to use, for example, in one label that says Luján de Cuyo, Torrontés, Mendoza, that wine has to be 100% from Luján de Cuyo, 100% Torrontés, and from Mendoza. That's like a generic example from appellation, okay? But in our case, in Argentina, every single year, especially now, we have like new winemakers growing up. They want to produce everything that's different from traditions. Okay, so every single year, and that's the funny part and the adrenaline, the adrenaline of every single harvest, because you always, of course, you have the traditional part of Argentina. That our fathers, for example, grandfathers, they buy all the same wine every year because they know they like that wine. But in our case, the new generation, we're trying to, drink and taste different varieties, different techniques. A white Malbec, an orange wine. Those are things that you cannot produce with an appellation. That's the best part, that you can produce whatever you want. And we have the perfect condition, climate. We have a very good soil. We have a beautiful environment to produce and a high quality of grapes. So you can produce a very good and excellent quality wine, and you can make it different every single year. So I think that's the funny part of the new world.
yeah, exactly.
Cheers.
Cheers.
So we've just finished our tour of the 3rd winery today, and it's just impressive and hard not to admire the joint effort that all of these places are putting into becoming more sustainable in every process of their work. We noticed in all 3 places we've been so far, everyone is super careful with turning the lights off as soon as we leave the room, but also this is on a small scale, but they're doing a lot on a much larger scale in order to improve their sustainability. This place we're in right now is Terrazas de los Andes, and they've just shared with us that because they've been able to monitor the temperature levels of the vineyards. They've been able to optimize how much water they need to water the vineyards. That they don't actually need to do this all the time, and by that they have managed to save water that is equivalent of the domestic use of 15,000 households of Mendoza, and that is just so impressive and so mind-blowing. And all of them have set really challenging goals in order to, within just 2-3 years, become 100% organic and 100% carbon neutral. And that is just something that doesn't happen so easily in Europe. And it's funny to compare the so-called old world to the new world. And it's not that it's necessarily easier for people here. They also have these difficulties within the mentality and established processes, but somehow it seems that they are managing to have real change going on for them much faster, and it's just really, really impressive.
Even though the period is very difficult, like there was so much stuff that felt like they stepped up, like there were more quality in it and more attention to it, and that was very impressive. For anyone that is curious about Buenos Aires, right now it feels like a very dynamic and modern city in a lot of ways. Still has a lot of struggle, and you can see that a lot of people also struggle, and most likely with the pandemic also it made things worse. But it's surprising considering the difficulties, the inflation here, it's about how much actually is happening. I didn't know that it had that much adaptability power in it to really get into new things, new trends, new technology, and use them so that there is still more proposition for life. So
another powerful insight is the radical impact of distances on regional isolation. It's very difficult to have a sense for it until you experience it for yourself, but the distances are so vast and there is so little going on in between the main cultural poles that it really defines the identity of the regions and the folklore around it. Take, for example, this anecdote of our trip in the bus between Mendoza and Salta.
we were supposed to do 20 hours of bus, and it's gonna end up being 25 or 24, 25 hours because it's delayed forever. And we thought that the trip was gonna be very interesting, but it's been about 20 hours of just this. One side, and then
Another example of how the vast distances can impact the culture in a country like Argentina is the fact that we have met a lot of Argentinians during our travel who had never been in the places that we were going to. People from Buenos Aires that had never been to Mendoza, or people from Mendoza that had never been to Salta. That makes the culture very much secluded and separated because the distances are so big, it is so difficult and often too expensive to make those travels. And that allows for a very clear distinction between regions that stays throughout the time. Take, for example, Joaquin, our great guide during our day with Wine and Ride in Mendoza. He was very well educated, extremely knowledgeable about wine, could speak English perfectly, but told us that he had never had the opportunity to go to the region of Salta.
My name is Joaquin Ruiz. I work for Wine and Ride. I'm actually a guide, okay? And I work at the region of Luján de Cuyo, that is in the west side of Mendoza. Personally, I love this job because it makes me every day meet new people from all over the world, just like, I don't know, from Europe, from South America, North America.
All of this created a very strong sense of responsibility for the project and our approach to those different subject matters, to make sure that we are just and fair in our representation of those different cultures and regions. So with all of these highlights and insights, let's share some of our biggest takeaways and reflections. The first one is related to something we've discussed in the deep dive about Peña culture, the fact that we came in with a singular idea of what Peña culture was. Maybe coming from the folk movement in France, we looked for something similar and we found it in Buenos Aires. It was very similar. And so when we went outside of Buenos Aires, in regions of Mendoza and Salta, we were looking for something again similar. And it was a bit of an adjustment to realize that there were very strong differences in the expression of what a Peña was, depending on the different region. And that was a big lesson, to not get stuck in one idea, in one thing that we are looking for, one answer. And that leads us very nicely to the next takeaway, which is that the prejudice of our own perspective can be deceptively strong. I take, for example, the interview that we've done with Horacio, and when I was editing it, I realized that we kept asking the question, where do people dance? And he was answering us with celebrations and rituals and different events throughout the year. And we kept asking, okay, but where do people dance just for fun, just to dance? Because that's what we've experienced in Buenos Aires, and that is what we knew from bal folk in Europe. And so we were looking for this particular answer, the way that we understand practicing dance. And his answer was very deeply culturally connected, and it took us a little while to understand that he was answering the question. And the last one is really not a surprise, but it's important to mention it nonetheless, is the fact that distances, geography, and history are fundamental when trying to understand the traditional fabric of a culture or a country. Understanding how the country came to be, the interaction between different people and different regions, it is the only way to understand how culture and traditions traveled from the past until the present. So how do we conclude this conclusion video about this first ever Blooming Times travel series? Well, I would like to leave you with a few thoughts. The first one is, again, that there is always more than what we think when we look at cultural heritage. They are complex systems with complex origins, sensitive perspectives, and they're very hard to grasp and even harder to capture. So this is what we will keep trying to do with Blooming Times. This is our mission, to try and represent with sensibility and with respect the different cultural fabric of different places in the world and different people in the world. Many, many more stories to tell and many more places to explore. For Argentina itself, the reality is that we have only seen half the country. And even in the half we've seen, we've missed very big, important cultural centers and events. So subscribe for maybe a part 2 of a Blooming Time series about Argentina. We will discover the south of the country and try to represent the globality of the cultural expression of the country. But for now, we say goodbye to Argentina and we head for France with first part of a series on relationship between traditional culture, language and geography. So stick around to the channel, subscribe if you're not subscribed yet, and you will see those videos come to you very soon. Thank you very much for watching. Thank you very much if you've enjoyed the first series of Blooming Times about Argentinian folklore, and we look forward to many more adventures and many more stories to tell. Thank you again for your time, and I'll see you around.
Gracias. Gracias.